Historically, Israel's known for its agricultural contribution, but it's gone from Jaffa to Java, supplying oranges, supplying to orange and apple and blackberry, etc. But what is it that has made Israel such a contribution to the world? A country the size of Wales. Israel has approximately 1 startup every 1,500 Israelis, more than any other country. It has more venture capital per capita than anywhere else, and it's second only to Silicon Valley in its number of startups. Now, the UK's recognition of Israel has been evident in every sphere in the last year, from media to business to the government. The UK government last year, in its white paper, it specifically mentioned Israel as I'll quote, encourage a stronger partnership between British and Israeli companies in innovation, high technology and science. This was a white paper for trade and investment for growth. This is how it strategized for its own prosperity and long-term growth. And Israel also has foreseen UK as a great partner, with now the UK being the second largest export market outside of the US. Now, as we at the Trade and Economic Office seek to improve this partnership, we'd like to bring together this panel, Saul, Frank, and chaired by Elliot. And I'd like to thank all of you for coming on today, for enlightening us, and also the team who have put this together. Firstly, Carly and my team, our team at the embassy, to our co-hosts, UK Israel Business, Daniel, Theo, and Anthony, and of course the video for looking after us today. Now, our moderator is Elliot Godkin. He was formerly the BBC South American correspondent, and he's now a senior correspondent at Bloomberg TV, and recently returned from a trip to Israel. So I'd like to now hand over to Elliot to introduce the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks to UK Israel Business and the Trade and Economic Office of the Israeli Embassy for asking me to do so. I did kind of print out my nice, very brief introduction, but I left it at home, but had a contingency plan, so that's very helpful. I'm particularly thrilled to be somewhere where I don't have to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning and wearing makeup is strictly voluntary. But I'm even happier to be here this morning because I get a chance to introduce our distinguished guests, Saul Singer and Frank Meehan. Now, Saul Singer probably needs no introduction, but I'm going to go ahead and give him one anyway. He is, of course, as you all know, the co-author with Dan Senior of Startup Nation, the story of Israel's economic miracle. To date, it's been translated, or is being translated into some 16 languages. It's sold more than 250,000 copies around the world, and in China is the only business-related book to be outsold by the biography of Steve Jobs right now. And Saul, I'm not sure if I'm being a bit saying something out of line, but I've just learned that it's now going to be a film of Startup Nation. I'm not sure who's going to play the lead role, but I think maybe Adrian Brody could do you sort of thing. That would be very good. So we look forward to that. But praise for the book has of course been universal. But I think the Jerusalem Post probably said it most succinctly, describing Startup Nation as the best ad for Israel in recent memory. Yes, even better than Ghana International. Now, on a recent reporting trip to Israel, I interviewed entrepreneurs, investors, and Saul himself. And the quote from Saul that I ended up using was this one. It says, the lesson from Israel is really a lesson about innovation. Innovation isn't mainly about ideas. It's about 2 other things. You need to turn ideas into startups. Determination or drive, and a willingness to take risks. And if you don't have these 2 things, you're going to have ideas, but not startups. It helps, of course, as Dan was just saying, that Israel has more venture capital per person than anywhere else. And that, in part, is thanks to people like Frank Meehan at Horizon Ventures, which is Hong Kong billionaire Li Ka-shing's private investment vehicle. Frank has overseen investments into companies including Spotify and Siri before it was sold to Apple. They've invested in a 16-year-old Brit in Summly, as well as Magisto. Now, 2 of those companies, I understand, one helps summarize articles on the internet, so you know exactly what you're going to get to. And Magisto, I'm told, is almost like an automatic editor for video. So thanks very much for trying to kill off my particular profession right now. But I hope they prove to be very successful investments. We're going to hear from Frank in just a few minutes' time, but first of all, I'd like to invite Saul Singer up to the podium to tell us firsthand about Israel, the Startup Nation. Thank you.
Thank you. So actually, you've heard now from Daniel from Elliot some of the basic metrics about what makes Israel the startup nation. I think one of the most important ones is that Israel gets about 2.5 times as much venture capital per capita as the U.S., about 30 times as much on average than Europe. But these are just, most of the book is not about these kind of metrics. Most of the book is trying to figure out why Israel. Why didn't this happen in some other country? And it really gets down to that lesson about innovation that Elliot just mentioned, because we do have a misconception about innovation. If you put the word innovation into Google Images, you'll get lots of pictures of light bulbs, because we think of innovation as ideas. And the symbol of the idea is the light bulb. Every magazine cover that's about innovation will have a light bulb on it. But that's really a misconception, because if you look at, say, the numbers of patents in the world, Israel is very strong in patent density. We're number 1 in medical device patents per capita. But in a number of other areas, other countries are number 1, and overall even. So if you look at patent density, there's 5 or 6 countries that are about the same level at the top. But these other countries don't have nearly as many startups as Israel does. So clearly they're having the light bulbs are going, but they're not getting the startups. So there really are 2 additional ingredients that go into it. And we call it, the first one has a lot of words for it. You could say drive, determination. Actually, I like grit is a good word. Chutzpah, we talk about in the book, is kind of related. And actually, probably the most accurate word is a word that I can't find a single word in English for it. And in Hebrew, there is a word. The Hebrew word is misimatiyut, which means mission orientation. And I guess the reason there's a Hebrew word for it is because most Israelis go in the army, and we, in the book we talk a lot about the importance of the army, and it's actually different than what you might think, because well, it's true. There's a lot of military R&D, but if you look at Israel, actually Israel puts 4.5% of its GDP into R&D, and that's civilian R&D. That's not even counting the military, and that's about almost twice the OECD average. So yeah, there's a lot of military R&D, but that's not the main story. Most of the startups are not military related. And also, we do talk a lot about certain units in the Israeli military that are very tech oriented, and that produce a lot of people that go into startups. And that's part of the story, and it's interesting. But that too is not the main thing. We actually think that the main thing is cultural, because what happens is Israelis have a third stage in life between school on the one hand and work on the other. And it's a stage where they get something that they don't get, in the other 2, like leadership, teamwork, sacrifice for something larger than yourself is surprisingly important for startups. And this idea of a mission, because the main thing they actually try to teach you, whether you're doing anything related to tech or not, is what a mission is, which is something that you have to get done no matter what. And you must succeed, but on the other hand, you must take risks in order to succeed. So this balance between must succeed and taking risks is a very tricky one, and very related to doing startups. We also think that there are other big factors. One is that Israel itself is a startup. It's a startup nation, not just because it has lots of startups, but because it is a startup. It took a lot of drive and determination and willingness to take risks for there to be a country called Israel, not just 100 years ago, 60 years ago, but kind of continuously dealing with all kinds of adversity. And we've been driven to overcome adversity through innovation. And in fact, I would say that this kind of engine has produced something more underlying, which I would call creative energy, which one of the exciting things about Israel is that, Startup Nation, the book, is really about how this went into startups. But it also goes into the arts and culture. It also goes into to social entrepreneurship. There's just as many fascinating things going on there in those spheres. But and the third big factor we talk about is immigration. It's a country of immigrants. Almost everybody themselves has immigrated to Israel, or their parents or their grandparents. And immigrants are natural. They're both naturally driven and they're natural risk takers. They're driven to move from one country to another. They take a big risk. And it's not a coincidence that another book argues that something like half of the startups in Silicon Valley were started by immigrants. So Israel's a whole country of immigrants. So that too is a huge factor. But I want to take this forward a bit from what's in the book, because I think it's significant for this economy, and it also relates to why there's been this such, what's a big surprise for us is we had hopes that it would be a bestseller in the U.S., which was, but we really had no idea that it would be kind of a hit internationally. That in China it's 14th printing, and in Korea it's 5th printing. I think I was in Brazil, I was in Kenya, even India, all kinds of places, Europe, and what I've been seeing is this hunger for innovation. And this idea that even though Israel's circumstances are obviously very different than most countries, that there's something that can be learned from Israel. And I don't think it's about copying Israel. I think it's about lessons from, and probably more important, working with Israel. Because if you take, what is Startup Nation? The basic kernel of it is doing essentially what I think Jeff Immelt from General Electric was just in Israel a few months ago, and he put it very simply. He said, you guys are great at innovation, we're great at scaling up. Bring us your innovations and we'll scale them up. And this has actually been the partnership. This has been the core of the ecosystem that we call Startup Nation. Is really, we are probably guilty for this, but we have this image of all these teeny startups and that's it. But it's really about huge companies and startups and the combination between them that has made Startup Nation. It's the Intel, Google, Microsoft, Cisco, IBM, everybody you can think of is in Israel in a big way. Apple just bought a company, and it looks like they're going to be opening their first R&D center outside of Cupertino. And what are these companies doing? I think it's that they're taking advantage of that synergy, because startups are great in innovation. They have no idea how to scale up. That's a different animal. Big companies are great at scaling up, and they have trouble with innovation. So there's this natural partnership between big companies and startups that you're basically seeing. The lion's share of it is big American tech companies. And this gets me to how Startup Nation can scale. And by scaling, I don't mean necessarily moving from big companies to startups. I think that's going to happen naturally to some degree. I think if it happened completely, that would be a bad thing for Israel, because I think that Israel's comparative advantage is in startups, not in big companies. There's a reason why everybody seems to be trying to figure out how to do startups. There's Startup America, there's Startup Britain, there's Startup Chile, there's Startup Skonkova in Russia, the Singapore is putting billions into trying to create and innovate. Everybody, it seems, is investing a lot in trying to create innovation centers. Meanwhile, in Israel, the ironic thing is they say, where's our Nokia? They used to say that. Where's our big tech company? That was the symbol of a big tech company coming from a small country. And it's like, why can't we do big companies? Why can't we do startups? But meanwhile, as I travel around the world, everybody's trying to figure out how can we do startups. So like in Israel, there was Nokia envy, in Israel, in the rest of the world, there's startup envy. But So I'm not saying that Israel has to produce big companies, though I think naturally it will happen more. What I'm saying is that the existing ecosystem of startups and big companies has a lot of room for growth, because 80% of this is basically 80% of the foreign direct investment in Israel is from the United States. Where is Europe? Where is Asia? Where is it? Why? How can it be that that's only 20%? It doesn't make sense that the companies that are getting such benefit, the American companies that are doing this so deeply and effectively, it doesn't make sense that their counterparts in the other countries are not doing it. I just want to say something about another ecosystem that I hope will develop, and we'll quickly move on. I think that, I've been to a lot of tech conferences. I'm going to be with one tomorrow. And one thing that strikes you about them is that even no matter where they are and no matter how international they are, they really, they feel like they're really about Silicon Valley and the American market and going out through the American market. And that's kind of the lodestone and the mindset. But meanwhile, the emerging markets are growing faster than the American market. They're bigger than the American market, and they have much bigger problems to solve than how to find a better restaurant and things like that. And I think that there's really an opportunity for Israel to become the Silicon Valley of the rest of the world, in the sense that we've become the place that if you want to do a startup for India, or China, or Brazil, or Korea, or Kenya, Silicon Valley is not the place to do it, because that's a place for the American market, that's a place for a Facebook app, or whatever. But what if you want to do a startup for India? Well, maybe the right place to go is Israel, because Israel has the same strong ecosystem, and yet, if you come to Israel, it can't be about the Israeli market. There is no Israeli market. It's going to be about your own market. So this is something that I'm working on right now, and I'll be happy to talk to anybody who's interested. Thank you.
Thank you. This one? Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Saul, for those opening words and about Israel as a startup nation, and the lessons that others can learn from Israel. I suppose you've alluded to a couple of things there which are interesting, especially right now when here in Europe, it's all about austerity and about recession and about belt tightening and the like. Is the startup nation model, the startup Britain or startup wherever, is that something that can be translated? Is this the best model of development? Because in recent days I've read about Russia saying, yes, we want to diversify, do technology stuff, but from the top down, if you like, from the state. Is this the best model of development? Is it appropriate for everyone? Maybe China should just focus on big companies and Israel small ones. I mean, what's the best model, if you like, or does it depend on the country?
Well, I think that there's one striking thing to me is that Israel had its quite unique historical cultural experience and produced startup nation, but the biggest strongest innovation sector in the world is still Silicon Valley, and the United States had none of the adversity that Israel, almost the opposite, to big country, small country, resources, no resources, and so on, almost the exact opposite circumstances of Israel, and yet the United States produced Silicon Valley. So clearly there are different paths to innovation. And so what I'm saying in other countries is, it's interesting to look at Israel. There are, I think, lessons about what makes a country innovative from Israel, but every country has its own strengths, its own culture, history, geography, and has to build on those strengths. And there are many different paths. So that said, I think it's right. It makes sense that every country is trying to build its own innovation sector. But also, I think a lot of it is about the synergies between countries. In fact, even within Israel, that's been an important factor because it's such a multicultural country through immigration, through all this, and that adds to the creativity and so on. But again, you get that also when you combine countries, when you combine the strengths different countries. So that's why I'm so excited about working with emerging markets, but also that's what we're seeing in this whole ecosystem that's developed mainly between Israel and the U.S.
And at the same time, of course, emerging markets, you mentioned a few of them, whether it's, I suppose South Korea isn't an emerging market anymore, but certainly in Asia and other fast-growing markets, where your book is selling very well. Clearly there is a yearning to emulate Israel's success. So I want to bring in Frank. I mean, your ultimate boss, I suppose, is based in Hong Kong. Is there a possibility, is there a likelihood of countries, whether it's Taiwan, South Korea, kind of emulating Israel's success, and perhaps Israel, maybe becoming a little bit complacent and being usurped as the startup nation?
I think that's a long way away from happening because it's very cultural. Like, I mean, I've been travelling in and out of Israel for a long time, and Israel has a culture all the way through. What's the word? The mission word?
Nissimatu.
Having that word just says everything, right? So it is a very hard one to say, actually, isn't it? But just having that word says everything, and I mean, I've always found that, there's a pride as well, that is associated with getting things done. There's a great support structure, and also just from the nature of, I sort of say the diaspora of, just the nature of everybody connected around the world just helps getting things forward. I think one other country that's quite similar to what Saul was saying is I used to, live in Sweden, and Sweden is a very similar type of country where it's so damn cold that you figure out ways to get out of the country for most of the year except for summer, and so it's that nature of getting out and our market is extremely small. It's 8 million people, but Sweden has just these incredibly huge companies, and it started Spotify, it started Skype. It's got that same sort of ability to create things and drive them forward. But coming to the big company thing, though, I think as well that Israel, we were investors in Waze. Waze is something that's getting up towards a very, very large valuation, and I think there is that difference in terms of what a big company will be going forward as well. That's that's going to make a difference. But I think Israel is way ahead of the crowd just because of the nature of everything.
And you mentioned, I think we were touching this before we started this morning, that you're looking to invest in even more. I think you invested in 6 Israeli companies and looking to invest in even more. One of the big concerns that I got, in fact, one of the only concerns I gleaned from my recent trip to Israel from people like Errol Margalit of JVC Partners and the like, is the possibility that what's happening over here, another credit crunch, that funding becomes scarcer for Israel. And Israel got, I think, $2 billion they raised in 2011, which is 70% more than the previous year. Mm-hmm. Is that something now that's a risk? As an investor, are you thinking, where's the money going to come from? And Saul, perhaps you can give us your insight into this concern in Israel, and if there is a genuine fear that the funding may dry up and this could adversely affect Israel's place. Frank,
it's very good. I actually think, for us, it's all a value play. So, I get great technology. We like technology as a play underpinning, strong defensible tech. I get that in Israel, and I get a great management team. Generally, these days, unlike the early 2000s, it's the guys who thought of the ideas are now actually running the companies. There's no old guard that are sort of in between, and I think that's actually making a big difference. And so, actually, what you're seeing a lot of top-tier investors like us moving out of the US and in towards Israel and emerging markets because we just get better value for money than we do in the US at the moment. So, I actually think that if there is any sort of crunch, it would be more towards the emerging markets rather than potentially valuations in the US.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen obviously the venture capital shrink dramatically since the bubble burst in 2000, and the whole system kind of still trying to get its sea legs and figure out, all these people talking about whether the venture model is working or not, and so we kind of see these waves of consolidation of a lot of the bad funds are going to kind of drop away, and the same with the bad companies. I mean, so the challenge for a country like Israel is, can you produce enough really great startups? And if you do, they're going to get funded, I think, even in even if the BC as a whole shrinks somewhat. And also, one of the advantages, I think, of a startup-centric economy is you are somewhat immune to downturns. I mean, we saw this. Israel did very well relatively in the 2008, and since the whole financial crisis. I think we only had one or two negative quarters and no negative year overall in the economy. And that's because startups aren't so affected by big drops in consumer demand. In fact, the downturns is normally a good time to do startups. So I'm not too worried about that. Though I don't think we can take anything for granted. I mean, because I think Israel, there's no issue. I'm not worried at all about other countries coming up and even getting to the cutting edge. Israel's a small country, so there's always going to be enough room at the cutting edge for Israel. The challenge is to stay at the cutting edge, because if Israel actually gets surpassed by anybody, then we got a problem, because we can't compete on anything else. We can't compete on cheap manufacturing or cheap engineers or cheap anything. So, except for relative to it. So we have to stay at the cutting edge. We can't take for granted that we're there, because you always have to keep moving.
I was going to follow that. I mean, those percentages of investment, both military and civil, have to stay for Israel to be successful, because it's the only country that now left that puts that effort into it, and that's what drives, it just throughout everything, drives everything. So, you've got to resist the temptation to cut that in the future, whatever happens. I think is super critical.
And so I suppose one thing that Israel didn't escape from, which we saw in a lot of countries like the UK, is a lot of protests for slightly different reasons in different countries. Do Israelis in general, do they all kind of uniformly feel great? We are the startup nation, this is wonderful, in a way that a whole nation would be joyous after winning the World Cup or something? Or is there a danger that we kind of, like, perhaps in this country, some might say that there are those earning, or in the US, the top 1% or whatever, who are earning, really big bucks, who are really kind of almost living in their own little bubble where everyone else kind of has to deal with the daily problems of, paying the rent each month or schooling or what have you. I mean, is this something that is possibly causing any, split in Israeli society?
Yeah. Well, one thing is, I'm an immigrant to Israel. I grew up in the States and moved to Israel 17 years ago. And one thing that strikes me is it's very typically Israeli. The reaction to all this is, on the one hand, there's a lot of pride, I think, in high tech. On the other hand, there's a lot of self-criticism, particularly within high tech of itself, saying, in this whole business, why can't we build big companies, or this isn't real, or this isn't sustainable, and there's a lot of self-criticism as well, actually. I forget what I wanted to say.
Just about whether we're having a kind of the have startups and the not.
Oh yeah, that's about the summer
Israelis, about whether those that aren't in this kind of sector who are just struggling.
So just in case you missed it, we had this kind of big Arab Spring over the summer, where huge numbers of Israelis out in the streets. And in fact, I think there's a pretty good argument that what was actually happening in Israel was sort of inspiration for Occupy Wall Street to some degree, kind of one pattern on the other. And it was huge protests based on high prices and big social gaps. And so what I say about that is basically, yeah, we sort of have two economies in Israel. We have the high-tech sector and we have everything else. And the high-tech sector is the engine and the racing forward and growing very well. And the rest of the economy is no great shakes. The overall Israel is, I think, growing fastest now than any country in OECD on average. But there is this gap, and you have one sector racing forward and the other one not doing that well. You're going to have growing gaps, and I think the solution to this is for the rest of the economy to do as well as high tech. I think it's possible that the rest of the economy could be doing much better the high-tech sector basically enjoys high competition, low taxes, and low regulations. The rest of the economy is basically low competition, high taxes, and high regulations. And so it's not exactly a huge surprise for me that one is doing better than the other. And I think, you know, what we're lucky is that we have this successful part of our economy that we can draw on and learn from, and I think grow the rest as well.
Kind of reminds me, I think Shimon Peres on various occasions says, you know, one of the greatest assets is dissatisfaction. But I just, before we open up to the floor for questions, I just want to get a sense from both of you. I mean, what's the biggest thing right now that people are talking about, people are doing in Israel? What is the next wave? What's happening in the zeitgeist there in Israel right now in terms of that you're looking for in it as an investor, and that you're understanding that this is the next big thing in Israel, Frank? You can tell us, and we'll invest in it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure, absolutely. Well, you can. Well, the good thing is that Israel has always had a very strong mobile-centric tech world, and right from the early days. So you've got guys who are, guys and girls, I should say, because there's a lot of. The other thing as well is that there are a lot of very strong females in the tech community in Israel, which is unusual. You know, in the valley, it's still extremely male-dominated, and so I like that balance. It's very good as well for things. But I'd say just the fact that the mobile industry, mobile tech industry is very, very strong in Israel. So, Waze and all these companies, Magisto, etc., that we've come into, they're all just really mobile plays, and that is the future. It's companies who are coming from a mobile-centric thing to start with, and not moving from somewhere else to mobile. So that's what I think is just really strong at the moment.
Yeah, no, one of the things that's striking, I think, about Israel is how varied the tech is. I mean, it's not just ICT, it's agri-tech, it's clean tech, it's biotech, medical devices, even entertainment, media. You mentioned JBP. They have a movie a company that's trying to compete with Pixar and so on, doing animated movies out of Jerusalem. It's very ambitious.
Out of Daisy, the latest one.
Yeah.
This Hurley was.
So you see, actually, you've seen over though the kind of history of Startup Nation, and its current thing is very short. It's only 15, 20 years. You see in this time how it kind of pivots towards whatever's hot at the moment, where whatever venture capital is coming from, kind of that thing. There is a tendency to go for that, and you see the flexibility in terms of the changing types of startup. And one of them, of course, is mobile. I mean, at the Mobile World Congress in Barcelona, I think the Israeli delegation is about 50 companies going there every year, which is just crazy. I mean, that there's so much. I haven't been there, but I understand that Hebrew is one of the main languages of the conference. So yeah, that's a strong area.
Lovely. We've got some time now. I'm not quite sure exactly how much time for questions. If you could just, hopefully there should be a microphone roaming. There it is at the back. If you could just say your name and say who your question is to, and please try. I know the kind of audience we are, that let's try and keep it questions rather than long statements. Thanks very much. Don't rush at once. Let's go to her.
Mira Wyman, one of the few women in actually technology here and in Israel. I'm an angel investor and represent a fund as well, investing in Israel, UK and Southern Europe. It's not actually a question, but I understand the word ambition hasn't been mentioned at all today, which I find quite interesting. The other interesting thing about Israel, which us Europeans who haven't had the privilege of going to Israel yet, I have, but many haven't, is the very ease of contact amongst peer groups and technology and so on. And people here don't have the ability to just lift the phone and speak to somebody. I think that's a major, major part. And the major part here is a reluctance, a sort of, maybe it's a respect, but in Israel, everybody has a can-do attitude, and there's an equality. I'm very sorry about the demonstrations in Israel and the difference in social levels, but the demonstrations in Israel this summer were amongst the doctors and the professionals and so on, and I think that's really a tragedy. And there is a huge social problem now, you know, which we know about, but I don't know what the answer is, but poverty is a big, significant factor.
So,
well, I don't think we have really a question there. But I suppose we can just follow. I mean, what is? I mean, you talked about Israelis needing to lift themselves up, if you like, to become as good as the tech sector. But clearly that's not possible for everyone. My brother's been a doctor in Israel for many years. I think as a neurologist, his starting salary is something like $12,000. I mean, you know, that doesn't seem sustainable. I mean, eventually something's going to give, isn't it? We saw very peaceful demonstrations in the summer, but you know, where there's obviously, you know, differences of opinion, let's call them, or splits between certain religious groups as well and less religious ones. I mean, is this a ticking time bomb for Israel?
well, actually, I'm not sorry about the protests. I think they're a good thing. I think that I was encouraged by these protests because, to me, it's a sign of health, which is that Israeli politics has been kind of stunted by the conflict. It's been largely around peace and security issues, and you know, unlike a normal kind of democratic debate in the U.S. or here, where you have politics basically defined on mainly on an economic spectrum rather than a foreign policy spectrum. And Israel was essentially what we call a foreign policy spectrum. And economic and social issues kind of took a back seat. Most of the parties, you didn't really know what they thought about, and it was very shifting. There was no kind of ideological definition of where you were on the economy or social issues. It wasn't really an important part of your platform. And what these protests did is they put economic issues very squarely on the political agenda. And I think that's extremely healthy for Israel. And I hope it stays there. And I agree that you need to deal with these social gaps. I want the rest of the economy to grow like high tech, and I could say that till I'm blue in the face, but it wasn't on the agenda. Now it is on the agenda, so we have the opportunity, I think, to start tackling some of these things in a way that we didn't before. And just on the mission orientation, more it's. Yes, I agree both on both other points that you made, that the lack of hierarchy and informality, being able to get someone on the phone and the networks is very, very important, very useful, and this sense of mission. I mean, when we interviewed a lot of people about Israel for the book, and we asked them what strikes you about Israel, one of the main things that came up is it's a country with a mission. That people, it's not just they're mission oriented in terms of what they do. It's mission-oriented as a country, and that's, I think, one of the huge assets for Israel in all this, and part of the explanation.
And Frank, as an investor, I mean, I suppose the outside world, as before Startup Nation came along, all anyone ever saw on the news was conflict and problems in whether it was the West Bank or with other surrounding countries for Israel. Does that ever register on your radar as a concern? You know, okay, we're investing in Israel, but there might be another war with them or something, or that yes, there's all these ultra-religious groups that are, you know, causing great problems, and now the government's just kind of, you know, in hock to certain, you know, right actions or whatever the case may be. Does that ever register as a concern for you? Because obviously you don't get those problems in the US.
Well, I mean, so Lee Cushing through Hutchison, you know, has been an investor, you know, Orange and many other much bigger type of infrastructure companies in Israel for many years. So, you know, we've gone with the flow, but we go with the flow with it in a lot of places. I think I don't see it as an issue. Actually, I think that Israel has a very good sense of its survival and knows how to make its, you know, look after itself, and I have complete faith in the international community to continue to do that.
I also noticed while I was in Israel that Israel definitely has the toughest boots anywhere in the world. You've got Errol Margulies and Bill Gates in a cage, I'm sure. Any one of them would come out alive. Got another question. I'll just ask the gentleman over there, and then we'll come to this lady over there. If we could have a nice short question, would be great.
Hi there, Novik from Horizon Ventures. Just a question in regards to government involvement in terms of promoting high-tech sectors.
Yeah, I think the government did two big things right over the years. By and large, it's not a government-driven phenomenon, but the government did something very, very important in the early mid-90s by jump-starting the venture capital sector with a program called YOSMA, which was a public-private partnership thing where the government kicked in money with venture, foreign and local venture funds, and that there basically wasn't VC available in Israel before that, and after it just took off. And in fact, the private funds ended up buying the government part and worked brilliantly. And other countries have been looking at that as a model as well. It could even be helpful here, I'm not sure. And the other thing is just a little more amorphous. I would say that the governments of Israel, whatever party, basically understood that they have to be nice to high tech. And by be nice, I mean try not to put too many taxes, too much regulation, and so on. And again, it gets to this issue of the rest of the economy versus high tech. You see what happens when they're not nice with the rest of the economy, where they can't restrain themselves, and they do a heap on all kinds of taxes and regulations. But again, you see the contrast with high tech. I mean, somebody I know said it's easier to start a high tech company than it is to start a restaurant, because there's more regulation, more whatever it is, doing a restaurant. And that again, that gets to the problem with the rest of the economy. But high tech, they've understood. And this we can't take for granted, because in a lot of countries it's not the case. It's not so easy to do high tech in a lot of countries because of all kinds of obstacles the government's put in place. And a lot of my message when I'm traveling is to this exact question: is what can the governments do? Is first maybe talk to an entrepreneur, figure out what the obstacles are that you're creating, and stop doing them, and then think about what you can do to invest and so on.
I think we've just got time for one more question. So, lady over here.
Hi, Prue Ashby, London and Partners. You mentioned inward investment into Israel. On the converse, most Israeli companies, I understand, when they globalise, go to the States first. What can we do to persuade them to come to the UK when they first come out of Israel?
I mean, the companies, it's true that Israel is very US-centric and kind of Silicon Valley-centric, kind of like the rest of the world of tech. And when Israeli startups set up in the US, they're basically thinking about the US market, and also to some extent US financing, all that kind of stuff. But you're right, there's no reason they shouldn't be thinking about the European market or the same basket of things they're looking for in terms of globalizing in Europe as well. And I think that's happening to some degree. And it's also, I mean, you see a sprinkling of Israelis everywhere in Asia and Europe and South America, but it is too US-centric for my taste. That's what I was talking about with emerging markets, but I also think it's true in Europe as well. And I would love to see more kind of interchange between the Israeli ecosystem and Silicon Roundabout and that whole thing. And I think there's a lot of potential for helping each other there.
And perhaps, Frank, as more Asian-backed investment funds choose Israel, we'll see more Israeli, as Saul was mentioning, rather than going west, maybe heading east.
Oh, yeah, definitely, absolutely. I think as you know, as you're saying, you know, the nature of, well, I think what is super interesting as well is that you're going to see, as you know, just from the way the book is flying off the shelves in those markets, is that, you know, Israeli expertise, Israeli, you know, the way we've done things is going to be in high demand in a lot of these countries. And so I think there's a big opportunity for a lot of these, a lot of Israelis who've been involved in it to be, you know, helping out China and Asia, and particularly here. And I think the problem here is that, unfortunately, the UK mentality, I'm Australian, right, so I'm an ex-colonial, but I think the UK mentality is, you know, it doesn't really listen. You know, the UK business is generally quite insular and doesn't like listening to anybody else, and I think that's a big problem, while, you know, the other markets are much more open into taking experience on and listening to things. And I think there's still a big cultural shift needed in the UK to actually realise that, you know, in order to get back and recharged again, they've got to listen. Germany, actually, in some ways, you know, there's a lot of startups in Germany and in Sweden who actually listen and absorb things. I think the UK mentality is still a bit closed, so, you know, it needs to open up and start to receive, rather than just think that they're still in charge of everything. But, you know.
I'm not sure if there was any of the Australian in that thing, but everyone is going to that. But once again, I'm afraid we haven't got time for any more questions for now, but you will hopefully have an opportunity to collar Saul or Frank just after this. But just again to thank Saul Singer and Frank Meehan for today's roundtable breakfast, and now some closing words from Daniel Seal to end.
Thank you. Firstly, a big round of applause again to Elliot. There's no real coincidence that you might see on the board behind you and some propaganda material on your desks something saying Innovate Israel, that we're launching a conference in the UK bringing over 50 Israeli growth stage businesses in the web, digital and mobile sector to come and meet their UK and European counterparts. So no doubt you'll be hearing a lot more from us. We're delighted to be partnering this conference, and as well as this event, with the Commercial and Trade Office, the Israeli Embassy, and many other counterparts are getting involved. And it should be an exciting day. You'll hear much more about it. I'd also like to thank BDO again for hosting us today. It's a great relationship we have with UK Israel business, and we look forward to many more events and joint initiatives together in the future. So take one of these, have a look, get in touch. There's an extra treat in store. If you've not already got a copy of the book Startup Nation, or you want to flog on eBay a signed copy, Saul is going to be very kindly offering to give you all a signed copy of the book, and there's going to be a book signing over there. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you once again for coming, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
If you could make sure you let Saul go at 10 o'clock, and we're watching live on Bloomberg Television at 10:30.